and welcome back to the News Desk. I'm Maria Bartholdi, joined by Simon Görtzen. The players behind us are having lunch before we get into gear with Modern. And Simon, I'm so glad you've joined me to kind of set up what we can expect later today and kind of preview Modern and what it's all about. So generally, what defines Modern?
So this is the first time we are seeing Modern at the Pro Tour level since Pro Tour Oath of the Gatewatch. It's been a long time. There have been some changes to the format, but we can say there are several rules that hold true for Modern more than for other formats, and we've put some of them on this piece here. First one is very few decks without creatures. So if you're thinking of powerful Eternal formats, you're thinking of combo decks, maybe you're even thinking of turn 1 kills, but Modern is not this kind of format. Modern is a format where almost every deck plays creatures to some extent.
And the next point you have here is highly proactive Game 1 decks. What is a Game 1 deck?
Well, that's a good question. It's basically a term for a deck that's much better positioned in Game 1 than after sideboarding. So a typical example of this would be Affinity. Affinity is traditionally one of the strongest decks in Game 1 against almost any other deck in the format. Of course, it has better and worse matchups, but this is the general idea. But after sideboarding, Stony Silence, Shatterstorm, Creeping Corrosion, Ancient Grudge, every deck will have answers to artifacts. So Game 2 and 3, those are the games you actually struggle to win at such a high level event.
Yeah, speaking sideboard options, that's one of the things that kind of defines Modern, as well as powerful disruption with cards like Thoughtseize. I can't tell you the number of times I've gotten Thoughtseize.
Well, Thoughtseize is one of the most powerful, maybe the most powerful card in Modern, if you ask me. It's actually a bit underrepresented, but the thing is, if you are not a Game 1 deck, if you are not super proactive linear, then you need the most powerful disruptive options in Modern, and they can't cost more than 2 mana because that's too expensive.
And your final point here, there are more than 10 Tier 1 decks. That sounds like a healthy format.
It sounds like a healthy format, and it is, if you ask me. We don't have a deck reaching over 10% of the metagame at any point in the last few years, and this is, to me, a sign of a very healthy, diverse format.
All right, well, let's take a look at these some of these top Tier 1 decks that we can expect to see at the tournament this weekend. And I see here, Simon, you've kind of made a gradient from aggro to control. Why have you laid it out this way?
So I wanted to idealize some of the concepts of Modern, which is, of course, a simplification, but it helps us to, say, why is Affinity different from Jeskai Control? The problem is you do have this one spectrum from left to right, from aggro to control, but you also have a very strong combo component in Modern, and there are these big mana decks that are somewhere between mid-range and control. They don't quite fit into either of those categories.
And it's very interesting, you have this line going from aggro to combo, meaning that sometimes you're playing a combo deck, but it's really quite aggressive in that it can win on turn 3.
Yeah, and then it's kind of racing, with the exception that combo can actually wait till the critical turn to go off. Aggro just wants to end the game as quickly as possible.
Well, let's take a closer look at some of these decks now, aggressive decks in the format. Here you've got some of the all-stars. Walk us through some of these.
So the 3 most played aggro decks in Modern, but also at this Pro Tour, I heard, are Affinity, Burn, and Humans. The last one is a new deck, 5-color Humans. Maybe we can talk about that. And then there's Eldrazi Tron. It's not your typical aggro deck because it has a big mana component, but it's highly disruptive, just like the 5-color Humans deck.
Yeah, playing that Thought-Knot Seer turn early feels pretty
turn
aggressive.
2.
Yes. And Thalia's Lieutenant there, the key card for Humans. You mentioned this deck. It's a really cool deck. I personally love playing this deck.
Talia's Lieutenant and 5-color Humans, this is the breakout deck from Ixalan, basically. We have the Kitesail Freebooter and enough lands all of a sudden to cast Humans of any color without any mana issues.
Yeah, your mana is perfect, essentially, in the Humans deck. Well, let's take a look at mid-range and see what kind of decks here kind of define the format. Grixis Death Shadow has been extremely popular. Black-green mid-range, of course, epitomized by Liliana of the Veil.
Yes, so Grixis Death Shadow is not the only Death Shadow deck. You can also play Junt, you can splash white in your Junt deck, you can splash blue or both in your Junt deck. There are a variety of Death Shadow decks. Grixis Death Shadow is currently the most popular one, but I wouldn't fault anyone for playing another color as well.
Do you think Death Shadow has a big target on its back, given how successful it's been recently?
I think it should, and I think it is definitely in the top 3 Modern decks, but it's not easy to hate out. what do you want to play? Engineered Explosive to kill Death Shadow? Maybe they beat you down with Tarmogoyf. They are basically black-green mid-range. They just happen to have a 13/13 in their deck as well.
What's the benefit to playing black-green mid-range over, for example, Death Shadow?
Well, honestly, I don't think you should do that, if you're completely honest. However, you have more ability to keep your life total high, which against some matchups like Burn can be a very valuable resource.
All right, let's take a look at control decks here. So for your control lovers out there, we've got Jeskai control and white-blue control. What are the fundamental differences between how these two decks operate?
So the Jeskai control deck is more creature reliant. You usually see more Snapcaster mages and spell Quellers. And I just wanted to highlight a card like Lightning Helix. You're playing red mostly because of the cheap removal options that are damage-based but still super powerful.
And white-blue control, of course, playing things like Spreading Seas to slow the opponent down.
Yeah, I like Gideon of the Trials as an inclusion, protecting you from aggro and combo sometimes. I love Search for Ascanta for both of these decks. This is the first, Field of Ruin, also a new inclusion. This is the first time in Modern's history that we can really call such a control deck viable.
Wow, how does that make you feel? Are you a control player?
I am, but not in Modern. I think, well, this is probably my historic bias. I think it's very difficult to contain all the different threats, from aggro, combo, big mana. There are too many angles of attack, I feel.
All right, let's take a look at another angle of attack. Combo. Blue-red Gift Storm and Lantern Control. That's a bit of a question mark, but let's start off with Blue-red Gift Storm. How strong is this deck right now?
It's the best combo deck in the format, and I have some comments about Lantern Control in a minute, but Blue-red Gift Storm is very straightforward. It knows what it's doing. It relies on creatures and the graveyard, but it can win without either. So somehow it's this combo deck that seems like it's easy to disrupt, and then you see some good Storm players pull it off anyway. And that's the beauty of this deck. Baral, Chief of Compliance, actually adds to Goblin Electromancer, so suddenly you can play 6, 7, 8 cost-reducing cards.
And it's just so incredibly consistent as well.
It doesn't always win on turn 3. That's something players have too much fear of, but turn 4 easily.
All right, let's take a look at Lantern of Insight. Tell me, why is this deck in this category?
Well, I had to, of course, talk to my coverage colleagues first before I put a Lantern Control deck into the combo slot here. For me, this is a deck that's just racing to get lock pieces onto the battlefield. You could call it a lock deck or a prison deck as well, but this is not a deck that is trying to delay the game as long as possible because it's generating card advantage. It's simply delaying the game because once the lock is established, you're just guaranteed to win, and you don't bother with the win condition in your deck.
How dangerous is it to play a deck like Lantern that has kind of the propensity to perhaps draw a lot of rounds?
You have to know what you're doing at all stages of the game. You have to know which hands to keep. You have to know when to activate your artifacts. And if you don't know how to do that, or when to do that, or how fast to do that, don't play Lantern Control.
Yeah, good note there. Let's take a look at your last kind of category here, Big Mana. Big Mana, we've got Black-Green Tron and Red-Green Titan Shift. Let's start out with Black-Green Tron, a really popular deck, and it has been for a long time.
Yeah, it has always been popular, but I think Fatal Push and Sideboard Collective Brutality have really pushed this deck a bit more further, because suddenly you're also interacting on turns 1 and 2. You have Fatal Push, super nice synergy with the mana artifact in Tron. It's no surprise to me that Black-Green Tron is the 4th most played deck at this tournament, after the 3 aggro decks we mentioned.
Can you just touch on briefly Black-Green Tron versus Eldrazi Tron? How closely are they related?
Well, actually not much at all. Sometimes we see a Karn Liberated in Eldrazi Tron, and of course they are sharing some lands, but the Eldrazi Tron deck, for them, the Urza lands, the Urza Tron, are just backup mana generators. They really want Eldrazi Temples to power out Thought-Knot Seer and Reality Smasher.
And then we have Red-Green Titan Shift here, Primeval Titan, kind of one of the premier cards of this deck. Tell me why you have it on this slide.
Primeval Titan basically fuels the other big mana deck, which is based around Scape, based around Valakut. Most of the time we also see Scapeshift in there, sometimes only through the Breach. But this is kind of the other big mana deck, which is a nightmare for some decks to play against. If you're playing a control deck and you're playing against Cavern of Souls into Primeval Titan, what do you want to do? Field of Ruins? That's not going to help you.
It's another deck that's also kind of, for me, who plays creature decks, kind of maddeningly consistent as well.
It's actually an evergreen deck in Modern, and funnily enough, we played this years ago, almost in an identical version in Standard, because Primeval Titan and Valakut were legal in Standard. Yeah. So this is one of the few decks that have actually been ported from the Standard environment into Modern.
All right, well, let's take a look once again at the spectrum that you showed us earlier. Tier 1 decks, aggro to control, combo to big mana. What's your overall take on what might be good to bring this weekend, or is it just kind of whatever you like?
Well, it is whatever you like. It is more whatever you feel comfortable playing with, what you know how to play. I personally would have brought one of two decks. I would have played Storm because of my experience playing the deck, or I would have played Death Shadow because I think it's the most powerful deck in the format. With the knowledge that we have now, Affinity, Burn, and Humans being the most played decks, followed by Tron, this decision would have to be re-evaluated, because playing against Burn with Storm is tricky. Playing against all these aggro decks with Grixis Death Shadow is a slog, and you don't really want to face Tron. So I would have to go back to the drawing board and rethink this decision.
Oh, that's really interesting. So excited to see what happens today. Thanks so much, Simon Görtzen, with a look at Modern. More Magic after these messages.